taking the river back. And I'm standing before you all, and as I was sitting up there and she's singing that beautiful song, I was sensing that each one of you, all of us, we have been polished by the river. A polished stone. Mark Twain said this. He said, 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things that you didn't do rather than the ones you did. So throw off the bowline, sail away from the safe shore, and catch the trade winds in your sails. To explore, to dream, to discover. So, taking the river back. We've had such an amazing last several weeks with Dr. Roger and his beautiful series about the resurrection of the heart. And Good Friday and Easter. How many of you were here at Easter? Yeah, I was here. Yeah, it was incredible. And so, kind of rolling on the river after all these great events. On Friday night, the Interfaith Ministry had Native American spirituality here. So the room is filled. It is filled with grace. It's filled with wisdom. And I sense that ancient belly wisdom. And wisdom is not knowledge. Wisdom is golden, and it lives within each one of us, in the very spiritual belly of who we are. I feel that wisdom, that golden thread of life itself, even goes beyond religions. It's about our spiritual life and how it flows. So stepping into the waters of a greater understanding, the fullness of our soulful life. Laura Gilbert, she wrote, "A river seems like a magic thing. And it's a magic thing as it flows throughout the earth is the river." The river, as a metaphor for our spiritual life, history and folklore have so many different stories about rivers. Rivers sing, rivers bless you, and even Denver, Colorado started next to the Platte River. So whether it's a little city, it's been a community, whatever, the river has always been an incredible metaphor for each one of us. And the trees and the plants and even the water is the nourishment for each one of us. And oh, by the way, and it nourishes the little fishes too and the frogs. And where do you suppose a fish keeps its money? Anybody? Where does a fish keep its money? Ta-da! A bank account. Very good. A bank account, and there's a lot of bank accounts in our country. There's a lot of rivers that are flowing. I want to share with you a funny story. And it's about a river. When I was a kid, my cousins and my little brother and I, we had the great privilege of spending most our summers up in Leadville, Colorado, because our uncle had the most magical cabin. And it had lakes around it, so we got to fish a lot and hike. And there was streams around there, but there was the Arkansas River. And we were kind of forbidden, all of us kids, to go to the river. Well, one day when the parents were in the cabin having a good time on their own, we all went to the river. A handful of us went to the river. And we're walking along the banks of the river, and sure enough, we found an old rowboat. It was an incredible treasure. It's like, oh my God, you guys, we just found a boat. So we put it on the river, and it was riddled with holes. God only knows how long it was sitting there next to the bank. But anyway, I remember being in the front of the boat, and here we are on the river, going back and forth, and I looked back, and my cousins had disappeared. They were all in the river, and pretty soon I was too. Well, it was a great adventure, and Thank heavens we were all safe, but we had such a good time. And as we walked back to the cabin, our shirt tails were just filled and dripping with the river, with the water. And walking back, freezing cold, but we had fun. And we experienced freedom. That freedom to explore, that freedom to realize our creative aspect of who we were. Now, I don't suggest going down a river in a rowboat with a lot of holes, but it was a fun adventure. But I realized that we do explore, and we're constantly forging new rivers. New rivers. Think about just the metaphor of the river. Constantly forging those new rivers. And a river is powerful. You know, it's the current and the flow. We all know that, especially when the rains come and the rivers rise and they become very powerful. And they have the ability to be able to rub through rock and to create another path. And I recognize that rivers constantly are moving, but they always follow a path, kind of like our lives. There is a path that we follow, whether we realize it or not. I know in our humanness, many times it's like, I'm just trying to find my path. I'm just trying to find my path. Well, as a metaphor, the river, I believe that it is that golden cord. It is that golden thread of truth. And Dr. Ernest Holmes, who founded our beautiful philosophy, he was always finding through other religions the golden thread. And he said that the golden thread lives within us. So, forging rivers. I think it was 2006. Dr. Raz and myself took a whole bunch of mile hikers to the Grand Canyon. It was an incredible discovery, adventure. And the river. I have learned in indigenous studies that when two rivers merge and come to a still point in that river, in that merging, that it's a sacred ground. It's probably where people came to pray and to give thanks for the flow of the rivers. Well, in the Grand Canyon, we had rapids. Oh boy, did we have rapids. Did I ever hold on? Thank God it didn't have holes in that raft. Or even if it did, it probably wouldn't matter because we're flying through the air most of the time. But we had the rapids, and I remember one day we came to a place in the Grand Canyon, and perhaps some of you have rafted the Grand Canyon, where there's a still point. It was open sky. The canyon had opened. Because over centuries, the water had rubbed those rocks and created that incredible canyon. But there we were, in this place, a still point. So I recognized in our lives that we can find God in the rapids, and we can find God in the still points of our life. And it's so important to be able to know that that great wisdom has its way of discerning and moving our pathways. I want to share from Bruce Lipton's book, Spontaneous Evolution, Our Positive Future, and a way to get from here to there. He wrote about a young man. And this young man's name, he was a Native American. He came from the Iroquois nation. And his name was Cotyledons. His Native American name was Two Rivers. So right there it told me something, that there was something special about this young man. And the legend goes, and this has been documented, the great mind and heart of Jean Houston has utilized the Cotyledons story in her mystery schools to teach about freedom and about peace. And so the Cotyledons' mother had a vision that her newborn son would destroy the Hurons, which was a tribe of individuals, people. She was part of that. So upon his birth, She and her mother, the Cotyledons' grandmother, took him 3 times to the river and tried to drown him. 3 times, he comes back. So after the 3rd time, they're not trying to drown him in the river. They're just going to have to put up with this little guy. This little guy was different from the other kids in the village. He was born with a hair lip, and back in those days, there was no way to correct that. He also, as he got older, spoke with a speech impediment. But there was something special about Two Rivers. So when he was in his late teens, he told his mother that I'm going to build a stone canoe, and I'm going to sail it upon this river. And I'm going to take peace and goodness to the raiders that lived along the river, pockets of folks that were against each other and constantly fighting. Just the metaphor of a stone canoe. Many times, I don't know about you, but there has been times in my life that I tried to sail a stone canoe. Can you relate to that? It's like I have a good idea, but no one really believes in it. And someone told me, just like his mom said, you're never going to sail a stone canoe. I sense he sailed that stone canoe because he remembered the river that moved through. The river that moved through his very own being. That light, that golden thread of truth. I guess I call it God. God has 101 names. That living spirit, that umbilical cord of light that is always ours throughout eternity. So he sailed the rivers, and he did go to the raiders, and according to all the documentation, he brought peace to those people. I'm not sure exactly what his message was, but it was to do no harm to each other, to be able to live in freedom, to the point that because of this one young man, it is documented, and this is around 1500, long before our forefathers signed the Constitution, that 6 tribes, 6 nations had found their way back to peace and harmony, that they existed together, harming no one with their words or with their actions. And so the Cotyledon has been listed in history as having influenced our forefathers in the signing of our original Constitution, because they went to the Iroquois Confederacy, which he represented, and they modeled. Well, we recognize that life is in cycles, constantly moving. And a lot of times what was great and wonderful has its turn in the bend of the river, where perhaps misunderstandings can come forth once again, collectively or in our individual lives. You know, we go to a lot of seminars, a lot of classes, and they're great and wonderful. And then we put our little rowboat on the river and we get down a couple miles like, what did I learn? Oh my gosh, I just forgot how to not harm myself or to harm another person. But the Cotyledon was a seer. And I believe with all my heart that each one of us have that capacity within us to dream the impossible dream, to be able to row that stone canoe. So I'm asking that if we have been polluting our river with condemnation of self, and probably no one in here has, but maybe you know someone who has, the condemnation of self or the judgments of self, the judgments of others. I have often sensed that if we as humanity, just for 1 minute in time, could give up judgment, we would take back the river. We would have peace like a river that flowing essence. So it's important for us to lightly, because we're all those little river stones, we hold them in our hands, to remember who we are as spiritual beings. Rumi said, when you do things from your soul, you feel a river moving in you. When you do things from a place of soulfulness, you feel that joy. We talk a lot about heart. Dr. Roger just did a beautiful series on that. The resurrection of the heart. To be able to move several steps down from our rational thinking, which many times keeps us in judgment, down into the place of heart, and that the heart is connected with our soulfulness, like they're one and the same. It's connected to that golden cord of truth, that light beam. So, I mentioned that God is in the rapids as in the stillness, because there's always that place within us where we retreat, where we unfold and allow it to beam forth from us. And I wanted to just mention something about water itself. Water is the first medicine, and I received that language from my Native American family and friends. The first medicine meaning good quality, because we're made up of water. Our physical being, water. We are sustained by water. All of life is, just like all the life that lives by the river inside the river. And so water being that preciousness and gives life. From Revelations 22, it's written, when he showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God, through the middle of the streets of the city, also on either side of the river, the tree of life, with its 12 kinds of fruit. And it was giving forth its fruit each month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of nations. It's very symbolic that the tree lives close to the water, close to the river. We have also been talked about that we are the tree of life, each one of us. We've been planted by the river. Or like Rumi has come forth, the great Persian poet, and he said this. He didn't talk about a tree per se, but he said that each one of us has come from the reeds that sit within the mud of the river. And those reeds have been plucked from the river, and they have been made into beautiful flutes with 8 beautiful holes in those reeds, hollow reeds, to be able to play beautiful music. I remember quite a few years ago, I wanted to learn to play the flute, and I went to one of my good friends who was a master at playing the flute, and I said, will you teach me how to play the flute? And this is what he said to me. He said, no. He said, I want you to go to the river, sit by the river, and the river will teach you. Well, I never went to the river to learn. I'm still not playing the flute. But when I was putting this message together, what I got, I understood now what he said. He said, go to the river, and the river will teach you. So he was asking me to go back into my soulfulness to learn who I am as a hollow reed. I think that's what he was teaching me. So it's very, very symbolic. And to be able to be in that place of being just absolutely fully alive. So when we have the tools or the understanding of that inner wisdom that can guide us on the river of life, and there's times on that river where you'll pull over and you'll get out, and maybe you'll camp for a couple days and just take in the beauty. Maybe you'll realize how connected that we really, really are. So it was Edward Arby who wrote, "I choose to listen to the river for a while, thinking river thoughts before joining the night and the stars overhead." So beautiful being able to camp next to a easy moving river. So I want to read something, and I know that this has been read many times, but I'm choosing to read it again. And it's a message from the Hopis. And before I read it, about the same year that the Hopis revealed this message to humanity, this isn't something that was just dreamed up by a poet. When they revealed this to humanity was approximately the same time that the old Incas in Peru, you see, when the Spaniards came through Peru many years ago, that a lot of the Incas went up into the very high mountains because they knew the Spaniards wouldn't know to come there. And so there's been generation after generation living around 21,000 feet in these villages. And they too have come off the mountain to be able to deliver wisdom that they say we as the river here, all those beautiful river stones, need to know. So I want to recite what the Hopi elders have given us. There's a river flowing now very fast. It is so great and swift that there are those who will be afraid. They will try to hold on to the shore. They will feel that they are being torn apart and will suffer greatly. Know that the river has its destination. The elders say we must let go of the shore, push off into the middle of the river, keep our eyes open and our heads above the water. And I say, see who is in there with you and celebrate. At this time in history, we are to take nothing personally, least of all ourselves. For the moment that we do, our spiritual growth and journey come to a halt. The time of the lone wolf is over. Gather yourselves, banish the word struggle from our vocabulary. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner, in celebration, for we are the ones we have been looking for. So to be able to keep our heads above the water, to me that's very symbolic. The line of a firmament, which is spoken about in the Bible, is to be able to be above the conditions and the effects of life. I think Jesus was able to walk on water because I think it was symbolic, and perhaps he did walk on water. But for me, it's symbolic that he was able to be above fear. So life is asking us to get above any of the fears and the fears that I'm not enough, to let go of the pollution that we have polluted our very own river of our judgments, and to be able to accept that the very heart, the very spring of the water from the high peaks comes from a place of heart within us, and it moves in our lives. And it's moving in our life right now, and it has its way of moving to the ocean of love intelligence, symbolic the unity of God. That each one of us is the unification of a living river God. So I ask that we stay open to how sacred we each are. You see, each one of us, we have a sacred heart. It wasn't just given to the saints and the sages. We each have a sacred heart. And to recognize that's where the soulfulness, that's where our creativity, that's where our freedom flows. It always has and it always will. So I ask us to step into the water. to just step into the water. Just sense that this water is our totality of our God life. To step into that water. And as we do, we begin to wade into the water and to permit our true identity of who we are as a living soul. We are a living soul. And to allow ourselves to begin to realize that divinity, to trust it. I sense that trust is probably, if God was going to have a name, it probably would be trust. To be able to trust and to let go and to be able to float on the buoyancy of love itself. You know, when we, here in Colorado, swimming pool, we have probably many of you, if you've been raised in Colorado like I have, haven't had the opportunity to do the buoyancy on the ocean. However, I know it's a body of water and it would hold us. And it holds us because we let go. We have to let go, don't we? And we just have to trust. We have to just relax. And we can float on that buoyancy. But there's a great, great power. And just like the Incas and the Hopis, this ancient wisdom that they have carried within them, and they're willing to come forth and to share. It is the time that we come together and that we celebrate, and to celebrate each other. A community that celebrates, goes beyond doctrines and creeds, goes beyond color, it goes beyond gender. And we all come together with the sacred, sacred heart. So to take back the river, and to take the river back by being brave. It asks us to be very, very brave. And bravery is acting fearlessly. To be able to wade into the water with no fear. And perhaps we can wade in the water because we have each other, as prayer partners. I give thanks for religious science practitioners who are always there in my life to help me wade in just a little deeper, because they're holding that spiritual truth. They're sensing that golden beam within. And they know that's the truth for me, and I know that's the truth for each one of you. So to be able to, dive into the river and to sense the freedom. It's not a freedom of license. I'm speaking about a spiritual freedom. To be free. Years ago, I had the great opportunity to connect up with a gentleman who was in prison. And he called here for prayer. And he had an allowance of time where he could reach out. I think he found us through the Science of Mind magazine. And I have permission to tell his story. His name is David Williams. And so for about 2 years, he would call for prayer. He was just a delightful soul. To speak with him on the phone, you'd never realize that he lived in a small cell. Because he was teaching me about freedom and about life. And his mother had passed away, and the prison wouldn't let him go home to be with the family, and we talked so much. I one day asked him, I know this isn't appropriate, but how come you're there? Well, he wasn't a fish, but he had robbed 5 federal banks. So, okay. He also read the Science of Mind textbook every day. He started a Science of Mind study group. It was North Carolina. Our previous senior minister used to go down there in the spring to the banquets to celebrate with all the prisoners who were studying what we study. I'm happy to say that he was released from prison, and he is now a unity minister. He took back the river. He took back the river. So it asks us to dive in, and I just shared just a crazy funny story about diving in because our freedom gives us joy. Quite a few years ago now, my grandkids, when they were little, we'd always take them to Glenwood Springs, to the big hot springs up there. That's where they learned to swim. They're great swimmers now, and so I was up there, and Kira, my granddaughter, she says, "Grandma, tomorrow I want you to dive into the pool." Off the diving board. Well, I thought she was kind of kidding, and so, of course, I'm a cool grandma, and I said, "Well, sure." Well, the next morning we woke up. Kira hadn't forgotten that. She shared it with her brother, Jack. And so they are saying, "Grandma, today's the day." Oh, my God. So you talk about diving in and trusting that inner space within you. Up on the diving board, I was shaking like a leaf. But I just had to trust that the buoyancy of that water and that the wisdom inside me remembered how to swim, and boom, into the water. To this day, just a couple weeks ago, those kids are now 13 and 11, said, "Wow, Grandma, remember the day you dove into the water." So we all have those special times with joy when we've been able to dive in the water. Sometimes it feels like someone's pushing you, but you dive into the water. So I want to conclude by just acknowledging a great man, Yeshua ben Joseph. Dr. Rogers has done a masterful way of speaking about Jesus. That Jesus was one of the great, great sages and saints that took that golden rope, that cord, he threw it across the river. He connected it to the other side. He connected the people that were standing on the other side with the people standing here. And he told them to trust that golden rope. Some people walked away. Some people stayed and absolutely trusted that. I think Jesus' calling to each one of us was about taking back the river, taking back that soulfulness of who we are. His calling was beyond boundaries, beyond gender, beyond the color of skin, into the fullness of humanity, and even beyond religions, to enhance our lives. His purpose was to give abundant life freely. So I want to read this in closing. It's by a beautiful lady by the name of Ganga White. And she writes this: What if? What if our religion was each other? If our practice was life? If prayer was our words? What if the temple was the earth? If forests were our church? If the holy water, the rivers, the lakes, and the oceans are holiness? What if meditation was our relationship? If the teacher was life? If wisdom was self-knowledge? If love was the center of our being? What if? So today I ask us to set our sails, move away from what has seemed like a safe harbor, live in the place of the golden thread, and catch the trade winds in your sails.